much for being here this evening. My name is Cindy Green. I am the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning. Before I get started, we have interpretation if anyone needs it for Spanish.
Si alguien prefiere escuchar la sesión en español, tenemos aparatos para que puedan escuchar la interpretación simultánea.
Interpretation for Hmong. And interpretation for Sign Language. Okay, to kick us off for this evening, it is my pleasure to introduce the principals of Orchard Ridge and Toki, Ms. Sheba Mays and Mr. Yui Nguyen. I'm going to turn it over to them.
All right. Getting applause for not doing anything. Thank you, I appreciate that. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out and supporting our school and our community. This is it. This is what the work is about, to connect our schools with our community. Again, my name is Yui Nguyen. I'm the proud principal of Orchard Ridge, and I'm very proud of our staff. When I first started, I recognized right away that we are fiercely loyal to our students and our community. And I'm excited to be in this space, and I look forward to our partnership for the potential and the dreaming that's going to happen tonight. So thank you so much for coming out. We appreciate you so much. I'm going to pass it over to Jorge.
Buenas noches, my name is Jorge Avalos, and I'm the new Toki Middle School Associate Principal. Thank you for taking the time. For being here. We're busy, we have kids, we have families, so thank you for taking 1 hour of time to spend with us and get more education on what this could look like for our community. I'll pass it on to our head principal.
Good evening, everyone. Sheba Mays. This is my third year principal at Toki Middle School. Thank you. When I hear applause, I always tell the joke. My mom did always say one day I'd be famous. So just a few things just to highlight the excitement as far as what's happening as we go into year 3 for me here at Toki. You know, some of the things that I'm really, really proud of. Number one, staff, of course, because we have a very diverse staff. And that wasn't necessarily the case with me coming in, but I strongly feel that our staff need to represent the student population and the demographic that we have in our building. And another thing, I take notes because I won't forget if I don't, is our EL curriculum. So we're in our second year of implementation there. So it's really strong implementation where kids are really accessing grade level standards and getting that ability to have multiple entry points for learning, and our universal design for learning where students are able to have that option of showing and demonstrating their growth and learning in ways that best fit for them. And then finally, Right to Read is something that I'm very proud of because I'm working specifically this year with our unified arts, so our health, PE, tech, because the question is, how do we incorporate literacy into those spaces too, right? So we have that opportunity to do Right to Read at the beginning of the school year, and I just like how they're just moving full force with it. And so I want to end before I pass it on to Ms. Cindy Green with the whole appreciation for Dr. Gothard's People, Purpose, Pride. And so if you take a look, if you get a chance to take a look, there are many, many, many bios on our building, like spaces by classrooms where you can get a chance to read about different staff. And they specifically have a picture there, their name, their role, and what their people, purpose, and pride means. And then at the end, at the bottom, there's a quote that says, it starts with me, because we as the adults are the ones that are driving learning in the environment, and we're able to celebrate who their people, what their purpose, and what their pride is. So, Cindy Green.
Thank you, all of you. Thank you for your leadership. I would also like to acknowledge we have one of our board members in the room, and I would like to invite up Blair Mosner-Feltham to do a quick introduction as well. Thank you, Blair.
Hi. The applause is for you for coming out tonight and for your engagement. I'm Principal Mays hearing about all of that stuff. I'm so excited. And I'm excited and honored to serve the Madison community as a member of the school board. One of the things that I love about our public schools is that they're a community endeavor. They're how we in Madison pool our resources to serve the children and families of our whole city. And we need community input in order to do that well. So we really, really need to hear your dreams, what you need to see for your children to get the absolute best education that they can here in Madison. So please dig in tonight and really let us know what we need to see for the potential 2024 referenda. I also want to thank those of you who supported our 2020 referenda. If you haven't had a chance to see the amazing new renovated high school, I really recommend it, especially as you're thinking like what's going to happen here at Toki, what could happen here at Orchard Ridge, because it will really give you a perspective of like just how important this work is for our students. Thank you. Dr. Green?
Thank you again, Board Member Feltham, for being here. A few housekeeping things, and then let's kick it off and get ready. So on your tables, you have note cards. These note cards are for you to jot down your questions. As we provide information tonight, we want to ensure that you have opportunities to ask questions. We want to ensure you have opportunities to jot down other things you're thinking, things you want us to know. So please use these cards. We have Jen right there. Raise your hand, Jen. Jen will be coming around intermittently and collecting these. We will take time out throughout our presentation to respond to the questions. And if you need more note cards, just raise your hand and we'll bring them out. So before I turn it over to our amazing superintendent, Dr. Gothard, I just wanted to thank you again tonight for coming out, learning about our facilities, hearing a little bit about the amazing successes we've had in MMSD, and learning more about our 2024 referendum. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Gothard. All right. Former principal here.
Good evening. Thank you, Cindy. So great to see you all. Nice turnout tonight. It's wonderful. I know that there is a lot going on, but there's nothing more important to me than making sure that you as a community understand how you can best support the Madison Metropolitan School District, your students, all students, the staff. So thank you for being here. I am the former principal here. My first year at Toki was Akira Toki's 90th birthday. Something I think about every time I walk through the doors here. He was an amazing man with a beautiful family and a really great Madison story. I believe the first Japanese American graduate of MMSD in the 1930s at West High School. His family farmed, well, I call it Southtown, off the Beltline, south of the Beltline. His family farmed there. And I think about him a lot. He was kind, funny, and he really cared about this school once they named it after him. I'll also share with you that last night at Oliver Park, the first person I saw was a former student who, in this 6th grade hallway at the time, I interacted with quite frequently. And it was wonderful to see that she's now an assistant director at Oliver Park Community Center, has a son. I got to meet her son. And these kinds of connections, you know, Principal Mays mentioned people, purpose, pride. It's the essence of it. That we really are an intertwined community in so many ways. And who would have thought that sometimes those rambunctious children who we once corralled here at Toki Middle School would be the ones that we now lean on in our communities to be great leaders, to be great people, to be involved parents, and to work with us to really help our community. So again, I just thought I'd share a couple of moments with you about what it means for me to be back in Madison. I'm really proud and honored to be back here. So now we've got some slides that we'll go through before we really get you thinking and collect some feedback from you. First, who are we? And you know, the story here as you're looking at the data before you is that I think it's important to say that in 1970, Madison was very different than this. And that's just, I was born in 71. So my life ago, Madison did not look like this. You can see now 18% Black African American, 7% Asian, 25% Hispanic, 39% white, 10% 2 or more races. And in 1970, this number would have been 87%. Madison's changed quite a bit in that time. It's also grown. If you really want to know, 44 square miles in 1970, today pushing 90. So we've definitely stretched away from the isthmus into the far east and west regions of our city. And with that have come a lot of new opportunities to develop new ways to serve our students, to get to know our communities, and to make sure, again, that we're centering our work on our students. You can see that 16% of our students qualify for specialized services, 47% economically disadvantaged, and again, the way that we measure that is by this is important, the number of applications that are turned in and certified to qualify for free and reduced price meals. I would believe that there are probably many more applications that are not submitted, and especially true for older students, high school students. So while we're at 47%, it's safe to assume that we have many students and families who are also experiencing economically disadvantaged challenges in their households. And we certainly see the impact sometimes at school. And 27% of our students qualify for English language learners, and these are students new to country. These are students who are born here, perhaps have parents who do not speak English in the home. So a wide range of different ways that we serve students who bring different languages to our schools in MMSD every day. Oh, got to mention 25,000 students, 6,300 staff, and what was that middle one? 52 schools. So again, this has been the same for Madison since about 1980. We've always been right around 25,000 students. Of course, with the pandemic, some different trends. With the advent of 4K and the way that we count students, perhaps that's impacted it a little bit too. But 25,000 has been a long-time benchmark for MMSD. Some of the things I'd like to brag and boast about that I hope you feel good about too as a community is, again, I shared last night with the group, I remember when my colleague at La Follette, I was teaching biology at the time, Brian Grau, was a teacher there, and he had this vision for creating a school for Spanish dual language. At the time, Madison didn't have one. And I got to see the dream become a work group, become a community cry, become a board-approved school, now Nuestro Mundo, Madison's first Spanish DLI school. And you can see now that we do have 2 schools that offer Hmong dual language, but the majority, about 19 of our schools, offer Spanish dual language as well. So it's expanded greatly. This is a real testament to staff and families who really want this and have demanded it and have asked MMSD to play a part in making sure that we can provide that programming. 61% of our high school students leave high school with some college credit. This shocks me. It really does, because that wasn't the case 11 years ago when I left. We were talking about this. We were saying things like, wouldn't it be great if? We were saying, what if we had this partnership? And that's happening now. And as much as I'm really proud of the MMSD staff, trust me on this, the community partners, Madison College especially, play such an important role in ensuring that this happens. And most importantly, ensuring that barriers are removed. So this is an opportunity for all students, not just some students. So really proud of that work as well. Strings in 5th grade in elementary school has long been a standard in Madison. Used to be offered in 3rd and 4th grade, of course. But again, we've been able to preserve it at the elementary school level, something this community values, and I remember some of the discourse around whether that would stay or go, so I know how much this community values that. 26 National Merit Scholars in a district our size is quite a feat. That really puts us up there in our students competing at a national level for having some of the most highly proficient students. Again, the way that this is conducted is the PSAT test taken by juniors in the spring. These scores are cut around the country, and then the top are awarded with the status of being Merit Scholar semifinalists, and then even a smaller group chosen as finalists eventually. And it provides them scholarship money for their college, and again, just a wonderful testament and a long tradition in Madison of that. Last spring, 4,000 advanced placement tests were taken, which is an amazing feat as well. The Alliant Energy Center becomes a test center for MMSD, so students can spread out and we can proctor those properly. But 4,000 is a large number. And it tells me again that MMSD students are supported and encouraged to really push themselves to the rigorous opportunities that we can offer. And something I'm really proud of that I think is incredibly important to the future of MMSD is the expansion of 4K and full day in particular. And again, Madison was a little bit late to 4K. We really were, back in the day when it became an opportunity to receive some funding. Bob Soldner will talk about the actual funding for how we do it. And yes, I would like to be fully funded for it, but I would also like to invest in our children. So it's something that we have to make decisions about all the time. But again, to offer our children, our youngest children, an opportunity for a full day program and to ensure that our youngest children feel a whole part of our community it's a value that I hold. And I think our community does too. We have 1,400 students currently enrolled in 4K. many in full day, some still in half day. Some of the areas, we're asking our community for support, additional support. And some of the reasons why are what I will call priorities or values that are held by MMSD. The first is early learning, as I just mentioned. Now, not only is it important that our children get a very high quality experience so they're ready for kindergarten, it's also important that our children become part of their school community, their families become part of our school community, and we can start that earlier. We also know that child care is a challenge across the country, right here in Madison and certainly throughout the state. So this becomes an opportunity for us to meet the needs of families at the youngest age possible, and also invite and welcome them, encourage them to stay with their school communities. Multilingual education, I don't have to tell you, based on the data that was shared earlier, that we have become a global school district. We truly have. Over 120 languages spoken. And it's an opportunity not just for the language part of it, but the culture piece of it as well. Our students bring many assets with them, from their households, from their countries of origin, from the ways in which they show up. And it's both, it can be a challenge, but it's an asset to be part of a school district that can honor the culture of our students and really work hard to understand how students can best work together and represent themselves and represent their school communities. Well-rounded opportunities mean this, that we understand that there are state statutes for what we have to provide for a child's education, but there are many more things that enhance that. Okay, there are things that are optional that we offer, and we offer that based on what student interests are, what families' interests are, and what resources that we have. So we attempt to try to understand the whole scale of what we can offer both in our school day and beyond our school day, whether it's extracurriculars. Some of you know, if you've been probably Val Phillips Memorial in this community, the additions that were put onto that high school, it's going to take music programming to a whole different level. There are opportunities there that didn't exist 2-3 years ago, and certainly in the past, that are now provide an opportunity. So we want our students to have well-rounded opportunities from pre-K all the way, or 4K all the way up through their time in MMSD. And then the last, which forget everything I just said if we don't focus on our culture and climate in our school district and in our schools. And culture and climate many times get used as the same, but they're very different. You have a direct role in one of them, I would argue maybe not in the other. Okay? Climate is the day-to-day interactions or behaviors that make up the environment in a school. Culture are the deeply rooted beliefs, values, routines, rituals that are held in that space. And those of you who are involved in school, who come and spend time, whether it's volunteering or you're in your child's classroom, certainly staff are here, you absolutely have a huge role in our school culture. As a member of this community, you have a huge role in the culture of this school. Climate is the way in which we build expectations and model them and redirect them with our students each and every day, making sure that it is aligned with our culture. So how did we get to 2 questions? Well, some of you know that on February 5th, well, not on February 15th, when did my job announcement become public? Sometime in the spring, I accepted the position here, and I knew throughout my research about coming back to Madison that the board and staff were talking about a referendum. And I thought to myself, I really need to be there. I don't want to show up July 1st, which most superintendent contracts begin, and just assume the leadership and working with the community towards getting to this referendum, getting to the questions and getting to the vote in November. So I came early, and I'm really glad that I did, because these opportunities were arranged. There were 10 citywide input sessions. I attended a few of those, not all of them, but I did attend all 3 superintendent advisory committee meetings. And that was a small group, cross-representation from Madison, and it was a chance for us to really test ideas, different values, what we were hearing from the engagement that we had with the committee, to discipline ourselves to start to narrow the focus. Is it going to be 1 question or 2 questions? How much is it going to be? Is it going to be for facilities or for operations or both? Those are the kinds of things that went into this and didn't really have an exact idea of what was going to be asked. We wanted to base our questions on what we were hearing from the community and also the financial realities that Mr. Soldner will share with you very shortly. We also had 4,000 survey responses, and those were used as well. Some of you may have taken it. Those were used as well to make sure that our decisions and our questions, the eventual questions, were based on what we were hearing from the community. And then finally, before my portion is done here at the beginning, I'll certainly be here to answer questions that I want to join in on. You know, Bob Soldner, our Assistant Superintendent for Financial Services, will do a great job of explaining through and taking you through some of the budget works of MMSD. But it will be really important that you can gain an understanding of state funding in the state of Wisconsin. So this 3-minute and 43-second video does a wonderful job of that. So we ask you to watch the video to give you a little bit more context in terms of the budget realities that school districts in Wisconsin are under, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague to keep us going tonight.
Our public schools are the cornerstone of our community. The education and opportunities we provide for students today shape their futures and ours. Schools, like any organization, need money to operate. But in Wisconsin, funding the needs of our schools has been a growing challenge. State policy limits how much school districts can spend. The vast majority of school funding comes from a combination of state dollars and local property taxes. It's called the revenue limit, and it acts as a cap per student that school districts can spend each year. Even if school costs go above this level, schools can't spend any more than this limit. From 1994 to 2009, these revenue caps were adjusted for inflation, which meant they helped schools keep up with ongoing needs. But since 2010, the resources districts need to survive have fallen farther and farther behind the basic costs to operate our schools. By the end of 2025, the revenue limit will have fallen more than $3,300 per student behind inflation. In the Madison Metropolitan School District, with roughly 25,000 students, that's a decrease of more than $82 million. What's more, each district has a different revenue cap, and these caps are not tied to the needs of the students or the costs to the schools that serve them. Our job as a school district is to make sure all of our students have access to the exceptional educational opportunities we provide, no matter what their needs when they walk through our doors. But state funding falls short of what it costs to meet the specific needs of many of our students. When that happens, we have to use money from our general fund to cover the difference, which means taking dollars from other important needs. The largest portion of our budget goes towards staffing. Our people are the heart of our schools. Without enough educators who instruct, support, and inspire learning, schools can't provide the lessons, programs, and opportunities our students deserve. Other important budget items include curriculum, technology, transportation, operations, and maintenance. We work hard to balance our budgets, yet resources for schools have been shrinking year after year since 2010. With costs growing faster than funding, districts are always looking for ways to trim costs and work smarter, like deferring needed school maintenance, cutting programs, reducing staff, and many other strategies. But schools can only cut so much before they start to harm educational opportunities for their students. To maintain class sizes, keep up with rising costs, take care of school buildings, and protect high-quality instruction, many districts have turned to their community to help fill the state-imposed funding gap. Since the arrival of revenue limits, over 80% of school districts have done so by asking local voters to raise their caps through an operational referendum. Most have used the option multiple times. Our children don't have time to wait for state policymakers to fix the school funding system. By putting the needs of our students first, we are investing in their potential and the future of our whole community. Strong schools make strong communities where families want to move and stay. Learn more about school funding by visiting our website.
So the revenue limit, and the video. I want to do a couple of kind of high level, get us started, then I'm going to get into the specifics of the Madison School District. So for those of you that don't know about school finance or don't know the details about school finance, in Wisconsin, every conversation about school budgeting starts with the revenues. Because the way the law is set up, as the video talked about, each district has a limit that was put in place in the mid to late 1990s. And what it does is limits the ability of a school board to raise a certain amount from property taxes and state aids each year. And those revenue limits, they talk about a unique revenue limit. The revenue limits, it was not set at a time where the state evaluated and said, you really need X amount of revenues to provide a good, well-rounded education. What they did was, whatever the district was spending the year before, so if a district would have, say, spent $1 million on new books and their costs were up that year, that was their new base the next year. If the board had been trying to curtail costs to save up for a renovation or save up for a major purchase, didn't matter, that became your revenue limit base, okay? Initially, that revenue limit formula was tied to inflation on the statewide average. And so you had sustainable ongoing revenue that increased with inflation. But then about 12 years ago, the state said, we're not gonna tie it to inflation anymore. We're gonna cut revenue limits by $550 a student statewide. And we're gonna pass a piece of legislation that says it's real difficult to have unions and real difficult for collective bargaining. So districts, cut your costs if you wanna continue with this. And from the very beginning, it said, if you want sustainable revenues, or if you want revenues to invest in 4-year-old kindergarten, dual language immersion programs, anything you hadn't been doing originally, your options really are one option. Go to your voters and ask them for additional revenues above this annual revenue limit. Thankfully, the Madison community has supported asks from the school board to expand not only operating revenues, but also facility improvements. And Cindy mentioned back in 2020, the voters approved a facility referendum, which we'll talk a little bit later when we start talking about the specifics of that referendum, and an operating referendum to increase annual operations in terms of revenues available. So that's kind of the context. An interesting system, and the details can get very complicated, but they're not important right now. The importance is the law says you're not going to have sustainable revenues, you're not going to get money to invest in new programs, and if you want that, ask the voters to let you do that. And that's what the school board has done. So specifically for revenues, over the last 2 years, 23, 24, if you would have taken revenues tied to inflation, we would have had $20.8 million more revenue last school year. This year we're projecting, had our revenues been tied to inflation, it'd be about $9.5 million, or over just the last 2 years, sustainable revenue short by $30.2 million, right? I'll talk a little bit more about some of the funding gaps in both federal and state law, which is the next point. And that's special education, or a program, federal and state law, that requires if a child needs an individualized education plan, school boards are required to provide that plan. Madison, you all probably know this, has a great program of an inclusive school environment where all students are treated and taught in the classrooms. Madison has a history of providing excellent programming for students that have been identified for these special services, which is great. When the federal law was put in place in the mid-70s, the federal government said, we'll cover about 40% of these costs. We're going to make local schools do it, we'll cover 40% of these costs. In reality, since the 70s, the federal government has provided anywhere from 10 to 13%, never meeting the original target of the federal law. At the same time, the state adopted that federal law and said the same thing. This is good. We're going to, as a state, share in the cost of these additional educational programs because no matter where that child lives, they should have a good program. Initially, the state had some limits put in law. They have since removed those limits from the law in terms of how much are we going to give and share in these costs. It used to be around 2/3 of those costs that were covered by the state. The state has never provided that level of funding, and instead they say, we're going to appropriate a certain dollar amount, and whatever that money is the money you get, and we'll do a calculation. Last year, that calculation was 31%, cost reimbursed. And so what that meant for us was $66.4 million from our general fund needs to be moved to cover the cost. Very important cost to be covered, but creates a gap that really was never contemplated under the revenue limits. Again, a structural funding gap created by state law in terms of loss of revenues for supporting the entire system. Finally, Joe talked a little bit about the focus in Madison about first 4-year-old kindergarten, then the expansion to full-day 4-year-old kindergarten, providing full services, the full school day for children that are 4 years old. It's great to get kids going in terms of early literacy on their education path. It also helps a lot of families in terms of child cares and getting the students not midday. So there's a lot of benefits to it, not only for the community, but also for the individual students. So the problem with that model is the state only counts a 4-year-old kindergarten as 1/2 in the formula. So they only provide half the funding and half the count on revenue limits. Now, if you enhance your program, you can get that up to 0.6, but the point being, state law doesn't consider 4-year-olds as whole children, which we, of course, know they are. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the funding gaps and the issues of our facilities and what the board has done historically. The last several years, the school board has levied specifically an additional $5 million that can only be used for facility maintenance and improvements. And since 2008, the board has levied $93 million. Now that's awesome, and that's good, but when you have 52 school facilities, and you're in the oldest district in Dane County, and 26 of your 52 schools are more than 60 years old, and that the useful life of those buildings are really coming to an end, what it means is there is no way possible any school board in the state can really, out of their revenue limit annual operating that's limited by the state, really maintain their buildings at the level they need without getting voter approval, right? Which back in 2020 the board asked for, and it was mentioned for comprehensive high schools were renovated, and definitely if you haven't been yet, get an opportunity to check that out. We're also going to have some videos on our website to show some of that work. In addition, with the monies approved by the community in 2020, the new Southside Elementary School was built, and also the old Hoyt Elementary School on the near west side was converted to Capitol High School, one of our alternative high schools. So then the other thing that the staff did and talked with the school board about last fall was the update of our facility condition report. And we're going to get more into it. You have some handouts in front of you. You'll see a letter grade for this school complex, which is a D. All of our facilities that weren't being worked on from the 2020 referendum were evaluated and graded. So 44 schools, I think, in total. But the point being, 40 of those schools got a C or D in terms of a grade, and that the facilities condition report evaluated the schools on 14 components, then used the same standard to be able to compare and contrast across the facilities, including a dollar amount. Now, there were 14 components evaluated, and we'll get more into the details. But the important point I want to know here is, even though the board has invested in the facilities, there's no way we can keep up, and there's no way on the revenue limit restraints, no way we can invest enough on our annual operating dollars. Okay, which gets us to the two questions. There's two questions before you. They're both, they're completely different, but obviously related to the school district. $100 million for operations, which allows us to maintain programs, retain highly qualified staff, recruit staff, diversify our workforce, do all the programming that Dr. Gothard talked about. And then there is a $507 million facilities referendum that specifically asks the community to allow the board to begin to work on 10 schools at 7 sites. When you talk about numbers, you always have to kind of give the context. Otherwise, well, to me, I have to have them in context. Otherwise, they don't mean a whole lot. So I want to talk a little bit about the operating dollars and what it means and where we are at in terms of a community and where the district is at in terms of our operations. And so the $100 million comes at a point right now where it's much more than just maintaining in terms of the operations. What the board has done the last few years is continue to invest in our dual language immersion programs, continue to invest in expanding 4-year-old kindergarten, continue to invest in early literacy, really investing in the educational programming, and really a commitment to excellence. And so what the board has done for 24-25 is pass the budget that does all of that, except we don't have sustainable revenues to maintain the budget that exists today that the board approved in June. We're using $47 million for the 24-25 school year out of our fund balance, one-time revenues to fund ongoing expenditures. And I've worked with the board along with the district administration, and the board's been very involved, and we've talked about the pros and cons of what that means and where we are at. And so a huge part of the operating referendum is to maintain that commitment to excellence that I believe the board and our community requires. But in order to do that, we need sustainable revenues in terms of the ask. The details of the $100 million. The $100 million ask is structured over 4 years, so scaffold or staggered to reach $100 million over 4 years, starting with an ask to give the board the authority to increase taxes up to $30 million this fall. Next fall of 25 would be another $30 million for a total of 60. Then the following year, another $20 million. And the year after that, the fall of 27, $20 million for a base increase of $100 million moving forward, built into the base in terms of sustainable revenues. We estimate this fall to be $26 a month in terms of an increase on taxes. And when fully implemented over that 4 years, it'll be $87 a month ongoing in terms of the increase to the revenue limit base. So I've covered a lot of numbers, so we're going to give you a chance to write some more questions. I think we're going to try to answer them. Yeah, answer a couple.
And we got a lot of questions, so if you don't hear your question being responded to right now, we got another one of these coming up in just a few minutes.
These are in no particular order. I'll give Bob a chance to catch his breath a little bit, going over all that finance stuff. So the first one that we received is I'll try to do this without my glasses. Since we live in America where school shootings are common, how will we design the school so if an active shooter got into the school, they're not able to take so many lives? In my opinion, large windows looking into classrooms that could be shot out, that type of event. So, I think a number of things. The designs aren't done. That will be part of a process that community will have some input in. I think similar to the large renovations that just took place at the high school, there would be the opportunity for that kind of feedback. But the experts that would come in to help those designs, that's what they specialize in. They specialize in working with communities around the country with what 21st century school design looks like. It is true, there's a lot of glass in that new school design for light. One way to have light, natural light especially, travel through a school is more glass. I'm not sure, and I think another question in here is about bulletproof glass. I'm not aware of the grade of glass, but in my work, that would be a very uncommon thing for a school to have. I think in the manner that we're talking, but again, it would have to be something that would come out of that design process. It isn't something that, that I have been part of with new school design or with school renovation design. Will new air handling protect our children from infectious diseases? I think those experts would tell you that there's likely no system that would prevent all. I think it would be much better, certainly to have buildings that are able to maintain a climate with air conditioning, dehumidification, and certainly the filtering processes that all of us who went through the pandemic know that we had to convert very quickly to. These would be systems that would have that, and they'd be regulated in a far better way. The fact is that Madison has made big conversions to more digital or electronic monitoring of different airspaces, so the system is quite advanced. It's just advanced in very old infrastructure. So there would be many advantages to having these new systems. And I might add as well, it's one thing to go in and piecemeal, putting these systems back together. The scope of renovation and replacement we're talking is obviously starting from scratch, building new, environmentally friendly, and certainly having the most technological advances with the systems that would be put in. I talked about glass and bulletproof. Will restorative circle spaces be installed for both middle and elementary schools? This is an interesting question. There is discourse right now taking place in the community about 3 words that often get confused, and I'll try to do this very quickly because there's a lot of other questions. Enrollment, capacity, and utilization. Enrollment, capacity, and utilization. You can get a capacity number by simply taking the number of students with the building capacity and doing some math, and you get a percentage. But that doesn't always take into account for the utilization of space in the school. Right, so I'll give 2 examples. One is restorative circle space, calming room, small groups, places for our mental health experts and support experts to work with students, and individually or in small groups. Schools weren't designed that way. They weren't always designed that way. The second is this, with enrollment capacity utilization. Small class sizes are something that people value, that people want. So if you have 4 sections at 25 and the new standard is 20, as an example, the only way to do that is to add another classroom. If you take 25 and squeeze it into a 5th section, you need a whole nother room. So the utilization of our spaces is different for a number of reasons than it was. You can have a building, and I don't recommend this. Principal Mays, would you like a building 90% at capacity? Probably not. There would probably be teachers on carts. There would be fighting over space. It would be really hard. So we need flexible space to do the kind of individual programming that we need. So I just caution you, not caution, but I want you to be aware that those numbers are sometimes used and displayed, and it doesn't always tell the full context for how we use schools or want to use schools in the future. Bob, that's it for mine. Do you want to answer a couple more?
Sure. Thank you. Again, no particular order. Shout out to Jen, who does a great job kind of taking all the questions and then putting them into some areas that we can be a little bit more organized in how we reply. But I'm going to start with questions on capacity enrollment, and Dr. Gothard talked a little bit about it. But first, the question, I'll just read the questions. Rumor has it that there are 5 middle schools that will be remodeled, and these middle schools only have 60% occupancy. Why not close one and remove remodel the rest, especially with stagnant or declining enrollment? There's a lot going on. First, not a rumor, right? These 10 schools include 5 middle schools that are on the referendum, so that's a fact. Now, talking about a little bit about the next questions in terms of the 60% occupancy, and we'll get more onto some charts to show the 5 middle schools, the 4 elementary, and then the 1 high school in terms of Shabazz Alternative High School. But the middle schools that are focused on, really first and foremost, all the schools talk about middle schools, which was a focus of the board when they talked to the community in 2020. The idea was focus on high schools, and then we'll focus on middle schools to modernize our middle schools. So Dr. Gothard talked about for decades, the district has been about 25,000 students. So under any scenario, no matter what happens to our enrollments, up, down, stabilizing, we're gonna need at least 5 middle schools and likely more like 10 middle schools. But the point being, there is some fluctuation in our enrollments. There has been some projections that said our enrollments are gonna decline, but our enrollments haven't declined. Last year, the enrollment projections talked about the district dropping anywhere from 550 to 650 students when we actually added students. And this year, it looks like we're probably gonna at least maintain where we are at and maybe add some more students. We won't know this year's numbers until about October 2nd. The third Friday count in September is a big count that impacts this year's budget. That just happened last Friday. But the reality is we're more stable than we are declining right now in terms of looking out.
About 150.
The problem with the enrollment projection models, and I say problem because the fact is a lot of the models start always with birth rates, right?
Because I'm here.
Fact is, the last few years, birth rates have been lower in Wisconsin and nationwide. And so if you have a couple of years of low birth rates, the models always go lower than what we're finding here than what is our reality. So starting with the 5 middle schools, even though some of them don't have as many students attending that could be based on that physical capacity of that school, really allows the board and the community time to say, what is going on? We've got a 20-year student enrollment projection. We're working with some experts that do some modeling to help us make decisions into the future. But the important point to know is the board believes we need to start attending because our facilities conditions, which is why the ask is to renovate those 10 schools at 7 sites. We're not taking questions from the audience, so if you have one, take a note card, write it down. You've attended a couple of meetings, and we've given you free reign. And so I think writing the postcards down would be a good idea. The next one is enrollments are projected to decrease, square footage is increasing. What will be the difference in numbers of classrooms? We don't have a number in terms of the number of classrooms. What we do know in terms of the analysis and what the board had was we worked with some experts in the field, architects, construction management firms, and our building services staff internally, and said educational standards for today are quite a bit different than they were 60 years ago. So the plan was, what would a school that serves the current population look like if it were built new today? And in every case, the footprint has expanded, really to account for some of the spaces that Dr. Gothard talked about, including increasing the classrooms, including making STEM space, flexible classrooms, some of the issues that we'll talk about later. But the plans to build new and renovate, really building new, is not to make a mirror image of what we have today. It's not to build a cafeteria this size or a classroom the size it is now. It's to modernize our middle and elementary schools for today's education standards and preparing our students. This is an excellent question. They're always good questions. What happens if the referendum doesn't pass? There's two referendums, facilities and operating. I'm going to focus a little bit on the operating. The short answer is no matter what happens at the referendums, in November, as every year, the administration will start talking to the board. Okay, you just passed this year's budget at the last meeting in October. At the November meeting, we want to start talking about the 25-26 budget. And the first thing I'll do is start trying to project where we think we're going to be on revenues in terms of available sustainable revenues. Specifically, a little bit more on the operating. The video talked about staff, teachers, folks that are providing the services to the scholars and families. 81% of our budget is committed and invested in our staff. And we're using $47 million in one-time revenues to get through the 24-25 school year. That's what I mean when I say we are, as a community and the board, at an important point in terms of what the future holds. And so if the referendum doesn't pass, the board will have a lot of work to do, more work than they normally would have to do in in terms of if we had a school finance picture that provided sustainable revenues or revenues to invest in programs that we need to invest in. You want to answer a couple of questions, Joe? Keep rolling. What happens if these don't pass? What's Plan B? We talked a little bit about that. This one says, I'm looking at our comms department. No one seems to know about the measures. It might be hard to sell once someone sees the ballot. Any PR plans? We've had a lot of PR plans, and we're going to continue to do it. We'll get more PR plans in terms of our website, which is the code at the end, shows the information that we have. We're going to continue to package and put that information out between now and the referendum. So we'll continue to provide the information to explain why the board is asking what they're asking between now and November 5th. Costs. Actual costs of the $507 million after principal and interest are figured is more like 725 to 750. And then yes or no. I would say the $507 million referendum, and I'll talk a little bit more when we get back to the slides, but that $507 million gives the board the authority to sell general obligation bonds. Once those bonds are sold, a 20-year principal and interest payment schedule will be set up. We think we're probably going to have, if successful, 3 times we sell those bonds. So there'll be 3 schedules really going over 23 years from the first sale. We did some estimates 6 months ago when the markets weren't nearly as good with the half percentage point drop that the Feds just did. We're going to have a lot better rates that we'll be able to get. But I think that 725 to 750, pretty good ballpark in terms of it. But I got to say, it's really contingent on what the market is at the time we sell the bonds. But there is interest involved.
Thank you, Bob. A few more here. One thing I did want to add, talking about the glass earlier, I did want to mention the modern design of building secured entrances for our schools as well, you know, where you have to come through to be checked in. There are protocols, procedures. We've added some things this year, some technology to make sure that folks have to give an ID and have to get a sticker that they wear. That's something that's new and that's added. For many of our schools, and for many years I led a school that the office is right in the middle of the school. It wouldn't be uncommon to encounter someone and say, ma'am, can I help you? Yes, I'm looking for the office, or I'm looking for the counselor's office. Now, at least at our high schools and many of our other schools,
at the end.
you know, visitors have to check in at the front desk, and there's protocols for how they get to where they're supposed to be. Another question on, this really gets into more of the operations. We need more money for mental wellness services. MMSD is severely understaffed for social workers, psychologists, and counselors, and more restorative justice services. Will there be further referenda to support these and other urgent staffing needs? You know, I think the district has made a big commitment to the staffing in those areas. We really have. I know the board has been very supportive. You know, I will say that it's going to be very difficult to maintain those positions, let alone grow, without additional money to go above the revenue caps. I mean, it just is. To give you just some scale of this, let's get some context. The $66.4 million that Bob shared with you that is our underfunding in special education, I mean, if we were to be fully funded in special education, that $66.4 million would be the equivalent of more than 700 of the individuals that were just named in that question. And that's not to say we'd hire 700 individuals in those areas, but just to put some numbers behind that in terms of what it means in this amount of funding. Are you going to educate people the difference between the city's referendum? Many people have negative feelings towards the city's referendum, so we're really not. It's our largest partner, 2 of the biggest employers in this area, and they really are separate. There's a separate body that approves their question, that does their finance work, and of course we are an independent school district in terms of the city as well. So again, we work in partnership, and I'm not here to comment on the city's referendum, and would ask you to find information for all the questions that are being requested of you. One of the goals of the operations referendum is attraction and retention of world-class educators. How do you anticipate the extra money being used to help this? Well, a number of ways. One, keeping up in a competitive salary is really important. You know, we are much better staffed this year than we've been the previous few years. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. But it is not lost on me at all that if we want this profession to be really seen as and valued, and we encourage people to want to be teachers and stay in it, that we have to offer competitive salaries as well, livable wages that will help people to thrive. So our operations, funding goes towards that. And it's all part of our entire budget. Decisions have to be made and priorities have to be made in order to do that. So it's a commitment that we have, it's a commitment that the board has. Most importantly, everyone in here, I want you to know this, that I've seen some numbers that Madison is expected to grow by 130,000 people by 2050. Maybe, has anyone in here, just show of hands, heard that number, seen that figure? Right, so that's out there. Madison's a destination city. I don't know many thriving cities in the country that don't have a thriving public school district as well. So I really want Madison to position ourselves as being a destination school district too, for the students we serve, for the staff that we employ, for the families that count on us. And this referendum is going to help us do that. It really is. And it's not just in a year or 2 years, it's long term. So we're not making the kind of cuts that unfortunately school districts have had to face. We're able to maintain and build on services, and we're able to involve and engage the community in defining who it is we want to be as a school district.
Thank you, Joe. We are going to hold on answering questions. We're going to have another time where we're going to answer more questions at another point in the presentation, but we want to kind of get back onto the slides. Again, just keep writing down the questions. Jen, mmsd.org/referenda is the website. Pass this card around. We'll get that later too. Okay. All right, so we answered some of these questions, but this is a good point to talk about the facilities referendum and the question itself, right? No surprise, I like numbers and I like the bricks and mortar side of things in terms of facilities. Maybe you didn't know that about me. And that's really important in terms of the facilities question. So the facilities question really is twofold. One of the criteria made for selecting the 10 schools was first and foremost the condition of the facilities in terms of mechanical HVAC and mechanical plumbing, right? So that was critical. That's the reason why we have Anana and Crestwood. The focus initially was our middle schools, as I told you, and the remaining high school at Shabazz, our alternative high school. But we have a couple of elementary schools, Anana and Crestwood are on the list of really significant need for infrastructure in terms of mechanical HVAC and mechanical plumbing. The recommendation was to do extensive remodeling instead of building new for those two elementary schools. But the whole question has always been centered around making a modern educational facility for middle schools. And the question itself talks about STEM labs, the arts, flexible classrooms, really modernizing and making the space, because the facility, air conditioning, does matter in terms of education, does matter in involvement, and is important for staff in order to be as successful as it can be. And so that's a large part about it in terms of focusing on modernizing our ability to deliver a world-class education and program. Okay, so a little bit on the specifics. The schools are listed. I'm not going to read them. You'll have that information also on the table in front of you. Toki and Orchard Ridge are selected, recommended to be built new, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. The facilities question, unlike the operating question, will have no impact on this fall's property tax increase. I talked a little bit about what that $507 million means. That means the board has the authority to sell general obligation bonds to pay whatever the cost is for these 10 facilities. They can sell bonds no more than 507, but if the costs come in under that $507 million, The board can only use the money for what the referendum question entails, right? We won't start selling if the referendum is approved in terms of general obligation bonds until into this school year, which means it won't have a first tax impact until the fall of 2025. When it does go into effect, we're projecting or estimating about $27 a month. Pretty stable for the life of the bonds, but a lot of things, as I was explaining school finance, change about revenue limits and change about what is the total taxing authority and what that revenue limit picture is, right? And what I mean by that is, the way the revenue limit works is, the legislature every 2 years meets and they decide, are we going to give some adjustments to revenue limits? Are we going to cut revenue limits again? And whatever they decide there, we have that formula. And then they decide how much state aid are we going to provide? And whatever that number is, we subtract that from our revenue limit, and the board has a base property tax authority to use, right? And I just want to say a little bit about Madison and property taxes and revenue limits, right? Madison, I remember that video where it was showing the pictures and they had the state aids and there was a picture with just like, 3 drops of water in it and just like, bloop, just a little bit of money into a little bit of water into the bigger picture. And then the property tax, the picture was like 3/4 full, actually 90% full. That's because in Madison, our community, we support our public schools 90% on the property tax and 10% from state aids, right? Because the state distributes most of their money in terms of state aids based on wealth of a community, wealth measured by property value, and then how much a district spends. And so if a district has higher property value and spends above the average cost, they get less state aids, right? Madison has been in that category for a long time. Okay, so that's the facilities referendum. A little bit more in terms of the 10 schools, 7 sites. I mentioned the geographical spread across the district, which was important consideration given the uncertainty of school finance every 2 years, given enrollment projections and changing student demographics, and the need to begin investing in our facilities. So we selected 10 geographically separated schools, but we also, and this school, Toki and Orchard Ridge is a good example, looked for facilities that had extensive green space, where we would have the option if our analysis showed to build new. That was also a consideration. So now the final considerations in terms of the question of $507 million. We are going to continue to collect information. I mentioned when I was answering the questions, we don't have specific plans of what this new school will look like. So what we're going to do, if the referendum is successful, first select the 2 sites that we're going to work on. We know for certain we're going to start with Shabazz High School and the Sherman Middle School, to be true to the board and the commitment back in 2020, that our focus would first be modernizing our high schools. After we get done collecting public input, we're going to come back together as staff, we're going to work with our professionals in the field, and we're going to come up with a plan in terms of what other site. That other site could be a single middle school or another middle school elementary, and then package the rest of the 10 schools behind that selection of the first two schools, the first 2 sites. We won't begin construction until spring of 2026, so it gives us time not only to focus on those first 2 sites, but also start doing long-term planning on what the community, what the staff and the families want for a school to be replaced. Swing spaces are also the other consideration. Who advanced that? I'm just kidding. So the swing space is another consideration of why the schools were selected, right? And swing space really is, what are you going to do with the staff and the students if you're going to be building a new school? For the comprehensive high schools, for those that didn't know, they were done basically over 3 years, and they were done in phases, and the students continued to attend. So we just cordoned off sections of the buildings, and the students continued to attend. Nobody thinks we can do that with middle and elementary schools. So the staff and the students have to be removed completely. We're going to manage that by, one, utilizing the existing building if we build new at a site, which will then cause us to increase transportation, which is pricey to transport families, students. The other option is to look at our schools that are not fully utilized in terms of capacity, to pick a spot to go for a year or two while the new school is being built. The other option is to bring in modular or mobile classrooms and set those up, right? I'm fond of saying this is the most complicated part of the whole packages that we put together in terms of figuring that out, working with our partners after we know what each school community really is looking for. All right, we're going to write down some more questions.
Please consider fixed FTE, especially in elective areas. This will also help teacher retention. So while a piece of that information is true, we also staff our schools based on what is required for all of our students to receive in terms of DPI requirements or the state requirements. At the middle and high school level, we do have electives where students do have some voice and choice around those options while still maintaining all of the required coursework that students have. This goes into the next question, which is what is the ratio for admin staff to students, teachers to students, paraprofessionals, staff to students? I will tell you that the Board of Education has a class size policy, and that class size policy is where we start when it comes to student to teacher ratios. In addition to that, about 16% of our student population receive special education services or have an IEP, and we have additional staff that provide those services to our students, and that is above and beyond our class size policy to meet those students' needs, as well as students that have English learner services and advanced learning services. So that is a little bit about our ratio for teacher to staff, but we start with our class size policy that the Board of Education has approved. The last question, I think I already answered, but is what percentage of students have an IEP or are special education? So our students that receive special education services are approximately 16% of our total student population. And if you remember at the beginning, Dr. Gothard talked about our student population is just a little over 25,000. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to, I lost it, where'd he go?
I'm right here.
Oh, there you are.
I'm giving you the main stage.
I'm gonna turn it over to him. He's gonna go through a few more slides, and then he will do the last round of questions at the end when we're all done presenting.
Okay, and we might want to break some of these up. There's a lot of questions here. Good questions, good questions. Why can't the board go back and amend the budget to align with funding?
To be like,
Well,
no, we're
the board-
talking about
the board did
25,000.
look at available revenues. Remember, I was explaining the normal process the board does every
What
year.
would you say about lowering?
Identify what I think is ongoing revenues, sustainable revenues, and what are one-time revenues.
Conversation.
Yeah.
Was that you?
And
or
so,
somebody
and
on
they
your team?
adopted
that
that
was me.
budget in 24-25 that I talked about. They're currently amending that budget now, and we'll take a final vote on that budget in October. So that's a decision the board made, and they do have the authority to, amend the budget one way or another. But the decision that the board made are the two questions that are before you in terms of sustainable revenues moving forward and to begin that facilities renovation. Revenue cap limit. What has been the average revenue growth percentage over the last 5, 10, 20 years? That's also a good question. The numbers are there. All the revenue limits are on Department of Public Instruction, which is the state's website. One can do the calculation. I can tell you, which we've talked about, they haven't kept up with inflation for the last 12 years. They were actually zero. And what the increases until 2 years ago were just making up that statewide $550 cut. So the cut was made 12 years ago, $550 on average. And until this last budget, the little bit of increases that were just made to put schools back at zero in terms of where they were at 12 years ago, right? So it's not been the rate of inflation in terms of where we are at. But we talked about that. Every household needs to live within a budget. What makes MMSD different? We talked about the steps the board goes through. So the board makes the decisions in terms of what they're gonna invest in and what programs they think are a priority based on the voters. And of course, we all know the board gets elected and serves on it, and so they are given the authority by the community to set the budgets. If the referendum goes through, what is the earliest construction would start? That's spring of 2026. What happens to the existing buildings? That's going to be part of that swing space conversation. And part of that conversation is how long are they going to be open, what the board's going to do with that. Part of that $507 million does include a cost estimate to demolish the existing buildings, right? Because we want to give the board the authority to be able to do every option. So you have to ask for the money to be able to do something, even if the board chooses not to do it later. But again, that money can only be used for the purposes. So I think we're going to get back in, put a hold on these questions. We're going to get to them. We'll stay here as long as people want to stay here, and I'll read through all these questions. You won't be required to, of course. Okay. I want to. This is in front of you, so this is kind of the important part. And this information exists for every one of the 10 schools, right? There are 10 schools at 7 sites. Some of them are combined middle and elementary, like we have here at Toki and Orchard Ridge. So these are the 14 components that the facility condition report analyzed. I talked about, and here's the color code. A is not going to be anywhere. I don't think there's any A in this. B is possible. F is there. I don't think we have many Fs either. But D is the orange, and you can see here, mechanical HVAC and mechanical plumbing are in the upper right of the squares. The other ones, 14 areas, go through and grade the facilities. But the primary reason were, as I said, mechanical, plumbing and HVAC, and then accessibility issues, and all the estimates include sustainability in terms of meeting the board's recent resolution to be zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. In order to do that, we built into the estimates that $507 million. The best option are the geothermal, the full geothermal system to heat and cool the facilities. That's only contingent when you get on site and start doing the drilling to see if it's capable here. Otherwise, it'll be everything from the full geothermal to less based on the site itself. Okay, so you can see the existing building and the green space. And now, I want to say the yellow is the existing footprint. The blue, purplish color is a proposed, just a proposed. I want to state this so many times. There are no plans to replace this facility. That's going to be a continued conversation with our staff and our partners in terms of architects and construction management firms as we seek input and develop a new plan, right? So here it would be the school, the geothermal is here, and then stormwater retention ponds are highlighted in the blue. It changes the patterns in terms of bus and drop off clearly, but that's the plan. In terms of the square footage, I talked a little bit about how we came up with the square footage. And what it was is based on modern academic standards, what would the capacity of this school be if it were all modernized, giving into consideration the classrooms that exist. And so the classrooms would be expanded, the library space would be expanded, the cafeterias would be expanded, the gymnasiums, are they all expanded? Yes, they're expanded also. So the existing square foot, you can see it on your table, is just under 114,000. The proposal would take it almost to 141,000 square feet, right? And so it's taking what's here and modernizing it, which really includes having more space for education, which we'll talk about what that means later on. So the final piece is the mathematical part of the formula and how we decided what we would recommend in terms of renovate or build new. And I'm going to start out with saying there is a mathematical piece to it, but it wasn't the deciding factor. There are more considerations at play than just the numbers. But once we got into it, looking at each one of the school facilities, if we got to a point in costing out the renovation, if those renovation costs exceeded 60% of the cost to build new, we said, we think it's more efficient, more cost-effective to recommend on the numbers alone to build new. Then we looked at other considerations. Is there green space on that current site to build new? Do we think it makes sense from other aspects in terms of renovations or additions or the original footprint of the school to renovate or build new? Always with the focus on modernizing that educational space. So in this case, the recommendation is to build new for Toki and Orchard Ridge. Okay. I think we should go into the green boards, don't you? The dream time. This is where Cindy shines.
All right, so before we take our last set of questions, this is the time to dream. I'm going to ask everybody to close their eyes for just 30 seconds. Don't fall asleep because it's almost my bedtime. If you're like me, just think. And I want you to think about the Toki Orchard Ridge community. I want you to think about what this means for our students, our amazing staff, our families, and the entire community, and what might be possible for improved educational spaces that will be able to happen through our referendum 2024. Thinking about it, I know people talked about security and safety, people talked about ensuring that we have spaces for world language, spaces for well-rounded opportunities. Okay, open your eyes. All right, glad y'all still awake. I want to acknowledge I know there's some of the amazing staff here at the school, so thank you for being here. So what we're going to do now, there's opportunities for you to continue to dream what the future of the Toki and Orchard Ridge family might look like. Flexible spaces, accessibility, universal design for learning, classroom spaces that are flexible, lab spaces such as STEM, arts, maker spaces, our libraries, the area we are sitting in here right now, our cafeteria, our commons area, think about this beautiful space, gyms, monitored and controlled entry, which gets into that safety and security, and sustainability. So what I'm going to ask you to do is you can take your note cards with you. I'm going to ask you to get up. We're going to kind of divide right down this middle, and we're going to go look at our dream boards just to see possibilities. It's important to note, as Bob and Dr. Goddard said, these are just ideas. We are not at a place where we have made any decisions. Those decisions come with future planning with all of you and others. But we're going to have this side of the room go over here and look at some dream boards, and this side of the room go over here, and just walk around and learn a little bit about what's possible. Take your note cards with you if you want, and then we'll come back and we'll just do Q&A for anyone that wants to continue to stay and hear the answers to our questions. All right, have a few minutes to dream. All right, we're going to take the last few minutes to answer some more of the questions. How was dreaming? Good?
Any more questions? No, I said I'd stay here forever.
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to turn over to Dr. Goddard to continue to answer questions.
I'm good. Scott and
So I don't
Carletta
think we
are
really answered
engaging.
directly about staffing ratios. I think we went into it a little bit, but I think what folks were asking is like,
Where do we spend our money in staffing? We do report that in our budget. It's definitely part of our audit. I do not have that number with me.
Okay,
It's
I like
something
it,
that we're
Jeff.
conscious of
Keeping
as
me on my
well.
toes.
The
I
board,
like it.
we'll ask as well. So between the various categories,
Have to talk to one of our
we
return
absolutely
customers.
do present that, and I will be sure that we
Thanks
add
for
that to the
engaging.
FAQ
Appreciate it,
page,
Carletta.
as
I think
well,
it's
so you can
important.
follow up on there. So when we talk about staffing ratios, yes, we are talking about that over
He's
time.
already tried that.
Has it changed?
I'm not going to do
Well,
that. We gave him 2 or 3 times.
I think the answer is yes and no. It depends on some of the positions. The ones that I will tell you is, if I look back 10 years ago at the number of FTE in many categories, it's gone up.
Yes, it has.
school counselors, psychologists, social workers, it's gone up. You know, that's a need that we have, and it's something that our board and that our community has asked for. So we absolutely have increased the staffing in those areas. Administration, to some degree, you know, is always going to hover in that, you know, that same percentage. It will go up and down, there's no doubt about that, but it is something that we absolutely
Thank you,
need to
Jen.
look at. But understand this too, we are a $700 million organization. We are a centralized organization. It takes people to organize and operate that organization as well. From making sure buses are on time, to paying bills, to making sure people are hired, to make sure the benefits are working. I mean, it really does require a centralized staff as well. It just does. I wish each building could have their own budget office and HR department, but we don't operate that way. With the mayor talking about Madison's growth, BRT housing, is this being taken into consideration? Do we have schools in newly developing areas? So we do have some land, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Soldner, Sprecher? We still have
Road?
land.
Yes.
So Far East, you know, I thought I grew up on the Far East side. No, it's way further now. Madison is stretched out, as I said at the beginning. We do have some land over there by the fire station, if I'm not mistaken. And, you know, we're going to monitor that. The
And
way
Far
that we
West.
account for growth right now is enrollment management. So where do we, you know, allow for students to go? And enrollment management's also management's based on busing. You know, how can we get students to and from their school sites as well? So a lot of factors go into how we manage our enrollment. But again, if we see a pocket that's being overcrowded, we have to address that. I mean, we just do. We don't turn students away. We can't. So it is something that we'll monitor. So an elementary school like Kennedy that has seen a real rise in enrollment, the decisions we have to make, are there other elementary schools nearby where we could do boundary changes to manage our enrollment? Or will we in fact need that new further east elementary school? And eventually we might need both, you know, to do a boundary change and bring a new school online. That could happen. But I don't see it in the next 4 years or even 4, 5, 6 years, although I'll knock on wood as I say that, because you just never know. Will you work with the city of Madison to discourage developing low-density traditional family neighborhood with high-density single-family apartments? The city of Madison's present zoning actually encourages traditional families to move to the suburbs. You know, I think one of the noticings that I've had is that there is room for a better partnership with city and development especially. Our team right now is tracking apartment buildings that are popping up all over the city because we want to have a little bit of line of sight to that. You know, what could happen? What could the results be? And for us, I think it's important to look at it this way too. Maybe you don't, but I have to, because we don't have resources to just, you know, add every time that we have new students. Are we talking about net new students into MMSD, or are we talking about our current students moving? You know, so two very different things. It impacts us, both impact us, but we have to look at them very differently. So that's the work that we're doing right now. Of course, if we begin to see a net new migration or children being born because of that 130,000, it's going to have an impact on us. And I think it could be a really good one and an exciting one, but one that is going to require long-range planning. There's no doubt about that. Mr. Soldner, I think I'm off the hook. I know you have a pile.
Okay. And then the other school property we own is Far West,
that's right.
out at the Acacia Ridge development. So that was purchased years ago. So we have
That's right.
Sprecher Road, Far East, and then we still have a site that was purchased Far West in terms of available spaces for schools that we have. So this is a good question. How long would construction take at Toki? That is twofold, right? First, we have to get the final construction plan in terms of what is the other site that's going to be worked on first. That construction then will begin as projected spring of 2026. And so I can't give you the specifics, but I will tell you the plan is to have all the schools done in 5 years. So there would be construction summer of 26, summer of 27, summer of 28, summer of 29, right? Now, we also have the flexibility depending on when we get into it in the planning, and if approved, we'll bring in, just like we did in this referendum, outside experts in terms of architects and construction management. There's always a possibility to move up that construction timeline depending on depending on capacity and depending on the market and depending on if we can work with the subcontractors, right? So we can accelerate that timeline, but a lot of things have to come in play.
2 school
But
years.
we wanted to have a plan that we
they'd be
knew
in this
we
school
could
while
manage
that's being
and be
built.
done in the 5 years, but it
That's
could
an
be sooner.
estimate.
Okay,
Of course,
it
because it's
says,
here, there might
your
be one
literature
moving sooner,
states
too,
this
just because it's-
long-term referendum is needed due to insufficient
transitions
state
are hard,
funding.
though, too, so
Yes,
it's nice to start.
Sustainable ongoing funding under the
Transition
revenue
between
limits.
buildings.
And then it says, yet the state
Moving,
portion
my
of the
teacher notes
MMSD
are
budget
hard.
is only 10%.
Can you time?
Hasn't
Go through
the
their
state
crap,
gap been
move
more than
their crap?
offset by the other 90% property
y'all are pack
taxes that
rats.
have grown 10% annually recently? So, without getting into too much detail,
That might be
because it can get kind of complicated kind of
She's
quick,
nearing retirement.
but our annual budget for the district is funded in total 90% from property taxes and 10% from state aids, right? Kind of overall. So the growth in the property value that was talked about, so every year 90-10, right, in terms of state
For
funding.
my St.
It
Paul
doesn't
living room this
include
spring, I
about
got rid of
10 cents on
overheads.
the dollar we get from the federal government. So that money is there, and then the
Finally.
rest is split
I've moved them
90-10,
like 5 times, and
right,
finally I'm just like-
overall. So when our property values are increasing in terms of the 90%, we can only levy what the revenue limit says. So the amount is dictated by the revenue limit, so the total dollar amount levy. The property value, in terms of increasing equalized value of the property, just tells us how much the rate's gonna be, that's then applied to the individual value of your home, right? So as the value goes up, all things being equal, and depending on where you are in terms of a value increase, if our costs are about the same, the revenues are about the same, value goes up, the rate goes down, so you pay less per thousand
today.
to generate the same amount of money, right? So the growth in the value is a good thing,
program.
but it doesn't change the total money that we can collect. It just changed the impact on the property taxpayer. What happens if operations is a no, but facilities is a yes? That's a possibility for sure. Will any amount of the 507 then be used for operations? Time frame for all schools to be done. We talked about the time frame for all schools to be done. That $507 million can only be used for
I don't
the
think we're being bold
specific
enough.
question and wording of that
I think we're begging for some,
question that the
and we'll get
voters
less
will
than some,
approve.
instead of
And
begging for it all
so none of
and
the
getting some. Does
507
that make
million
sense?
can be used for virtual kindergarten or dual
No,
language
state.
immersion or
It's like,
retaining.
get after it. I want some
staff
ass kickers.
in terms of attracting.
And I just don't
staff.
feel it.
That is all funded through that operations question.
Just don't. So I'm gonna start, get this
How will schools
referendum
get
done, I'm gonna
fixed
start
if
going after
facilities
the
don't
state
pass, the roof is leaking?
with your permission, of
We're
course.
essentially using
Not gonna be
Band-Aids with
rogue.
the $5 million maintenance budget.
Yeah.
It's bigger than just us.
The board has the option to use some of the Fund 10 monies in addition to that money that's set aside, that $5 million I talked about.
Yeah.
But I also explained to you the constraints on that general fund are operating dollars, really tied up in
We do.
the provision of the special education services and the other operations. So it's always really difficult to put more money to it. But we do have a list of priority projects and, obviously roofs are fixed, right, to the best we can. And I know Building Services is updating their list of roofs. We were talking about that last spring. Okay, I do not know this, but I'm going to read the question. Recall how open space at Jefferson didn't really work. Keep that in mind with new or remodeled space. Flexible is nice, but don't get too wild on open space. I like that. Joe's going to talk about that. Thank you, Joe.
Gillespie Middle School. Middle School were both built with open school concept in mind. You're absolutely right. Those schools have changed models off and on over the years. Many times what they use to block them in is shelves. Things that are portable, not very soundproof, and it's really hard to supervise. No doors on some classrooms. So definitely something that we're taking in mind When we talk about flexible learning, it's more about the ability to use many things in the classroom. I'll give you one example. Last week I was in my former biology lab that I taught in. When I taught, there were 28 desks in the room, and then there were lab benches on the side. Now, you can imagine filling up 28 desks and moving around, doing labs, going back and forth. It was really hard to move throughout that room. That same room now has labs that are on wheels, so that you can use it for your classroom lecture, and then you can move them anywhere that you want for labs to take place, really maximizing the space. That's an example of flexible. So it's not just these fixed things where students are in these nice, neat rows all day long, that there is the ability for educators to use the space for what they're teaching and for what the needs of children are.
I got another one since you have the mic. You are much better at this question.
Is there a plan to preserve the memorial tree dedicated to a 7th grader who took his life in the early 2000s? Is it in the geothermal areas proposed? So we will have to be very mindful of anything that is determined as a monument or anything that we've recognized students or the community for, and that would be something that we would ask the project management team to be aware of in working with the school community. So absolutely, we would like to do that where possible. Now, I don't know about a large tree, if we'd be able to relocate something like that, but certainly if there are other commemorative artifacts, benches, things like that, that we would like to preserve that, yes.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, continue reading. What is the difference between high school and middle school and elementary schools that a swing space is needed? I mean, obviously there's different opinions, but the research we did and construction management companies that we work with and other school districts, when they did the renovations, none of them really, well, as far as we're concerned, none of them really kept students in the middle and elementary school, particularly when there's the kind of renovation we're talking about at Anana Crestwood. And in the case of Tolkien Orchard Ridge, we're building new, right? So that won't even come into play. The students and staff will stay right here as a new facility is built next door. But that obviously is a decision based on the information at the time. But that's not part of our original plan. Right now, our recommendation is to move the students and staff out of the building when we are renovating or doing construction. Why joint buildings during construction of the kids in the old building? What kind of newer securities will be added? We kind of talked about that in terms of school safety possibilities, in terms of draining. That's a critical piece in terms of new school construction and significant renovations. We talked about the kids being in this building when we build new. I'm not sure what joint buildings mean. What happens to old buildings? Does the community have a say? That's a good question. The community always has a say, right? First of all, every board meeting, people can speak their mind, and people talk to Blair and other board members all the time, and obviously they're elected officials. They need to be responsive to their constituencies. But right now, when we put the plan together, as I said, we included in that $507 million the option for demolition. But we would continue to work with administration and experts in the field to come up with recommendations and implement the plan for sure. When rehabs and new schools are finally completed, will they be filled with solar panels? The specific design of all the schools, they could include solar panels, right? They could include solar panels on the roof. We're going to leave that to the architects and how they think we need to do what we can. I mean, our main focus on it, we included on our cost estimates all the projects to keep us on track to be zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. Whether that includes solar panels or not will be specific to each one of the projects. But solar panels are part of our work now. $507 million is listed as covering 23 years. What does this time span mean? I think I answered that one. What is the plan to address the many other C and D rated schools? Excellent question. What is MMSD doing to change state funding? Are they joining other school districts and to lobby state government? I'll go with the plan to address the other C and D rated schools. We'll hopefully begin this plan as the question is, if approved by the voters. And the other plans will be addressed a couple of different ways, right? The other facilities. One, we're going to continue to update the facility condition report. The board has a policy that requires us to update the long-range facility plan every 3 years. That long-range facility plan was updated this past spring. So we'll continue to work on that. The board also created something called the Fund 46, which is really a funding instrument allowed under state law that included a 10-year capital improvement plan as part of it. So what I'm saying is we're going to continue to evaluate and come up with recommendations and plans for the board to consider moving forward. And whether that means renovation or build new will be the decisions at the time based on the information that we have. We're always talking about state funding. I belong to a statewide association. Dr. Gothard does, so do other administrators. In terms of the legislature, I've been doing school finance work for a long time. My first 8 years out of graduate school, way back in the 90s, I staffed the Joint Committee on Finance, which is the legislature's budget committee. For 8 years I did that. And right now, the legislature is fully aware of the school finance system they've created over the last 20 years, primarily Republicans. And they're just really not committed to sharing in the costs with public schools right now at the state funding level. I think my hope is, my opinion is, with fairer required legislative maps from the Supreme Court, in time we can return to what I believe has made Wisconsin strong statewide, a solid, strong, nationally ranked public education system that was only possible when the state, per the Constitution, help support local public schools with state funding and state resources, right? And until we can return to that, we'll continue to talk and, just like we do now, explain what the law does to local school communities and continue to remind the legislature this is what's happening here, right? Okay. Why do all the capital projects at once? Can it be done every 2 years to account for need? We talked a little bit about that. It's staggered out to go in phases over 5 years. That's what that question is about. And it can't be forever, right? We cannot do major renovations or build schools under our operating budgets, right? It's just not possible at all. And so right now, status quo law is, if the board wants to continue to do a facilities project, they're going to have to go back and ask the voters for additional funds. But that's a future decision. If we undertake this plan, we will have to, just kind of in the same frame, we'll have to give all the remaining 33 schools rated C or D the same treatment. How can that be fiscally responsible? All I can say is, just like this, I would assume we'll continue to use a method based on data and recommend decisions to the board, and ultimately the board gets to decide. But whether that means renovate, whether that means build new, whether that means the school is no longer being used because of the demographic changes in our district and we have to build a brand new one out on Sprecher Road on the far east side, or out at Acacia Ridge subdivision on the far west side, only the future will know that. Okay, we have got a lot of good questions here tonight, and a lot of them. This might be a record. Tonight might be the record. Record setting. What is being done for 120-year-old Randall School? I attended it in the 1940s. Randall's come up a couple of times as, who could that be? Not me. I would be only guessing at what the grade is on Randall. I can just tell you in terms of the middle school was the focus and the mechanical and HVAC. So until we hear differently from the board, we'll continue to focus on our middle schools and then like the high priority elementary schools, and it will just have to be evaluated as we go forward.
Tear it down.
Oh,
Tear it down.
that's one opinion.
We agree with you.
All right. So, we'll go to the next question. If the referendum does not pass, do you see enrollment? Do you see enrollment? Oh my goodness, where's the cut? There it is. If the referendum does not pass, do you see enrollment dropping to go to other districts or private schools? I think Dr. Gothard talking about wanting to develop us as a destination school district as the city of Madison and Dane County continues. I mean, really, we are leading the state right now in terms of property value, in terms of growth and development. I think, as we mentioned and the board agrees, you need to have world-class education institutions, right? Really a strong district makes a strong city, and it goes both ways. And so I think it does matter, but parents do have choices in Wisconsin to attend independent charters and private schools. I can talk about how private schools are funded, but that's we don't have to go there. That's a different question. We can talk about it afterwards if anyone wants to talk about how the school finance works there. There's a comment question. I think this is the question.
Oh my
Okay.
God. It's a gift.
Will combined schools still be combined, Orchard Ridge and Toki?
And he's
Right now, there's no
politically
plan to change
savvy,
that
too.
in terms of the
He's politically
recommendations of the
savvy, too.
board.
We don't often get that in a business
Our
person.
area is going to be shared. The way the plans are designed now, there's separate gyms and separate cafeterias, but again, those were just based on how
It's right there.
it could be
Fuchsia.
done. That specific question and how the new school is ultimately built will have largely be dependent on the staff and the families that are going here now, right? The board clearly directed us to, which is smart, to include the staff and the families and communities that are impacted, right? So we're going to continue to draw that information. We're seeing issues having combined schools be addressed, having elementary and middle schools together seems to not be a good idea. That, I think we've talked about those issues, and those will continue to be addressed right when we get, like I said, into the public input. I think this is the last one, because this was a comment. Yeah, Joe answered that one. Okay, I think this is it. Maybe some enhancements can be done over a longer period of time, so money isn't so much. Also, we can learn what works or doesn't, so modifications can be made and maybe save money. This referendum is just too large. I'm concerned about replacing all HVAC to electric. Do we really know if it is cost effective? Maybe only change on systems that must be changed. Just because something is old doesn't mean it needs replacing. New stuff doesn't necessarily last longer. There's a lot of good points here. I'll just talk about the last part in terms of the standards that are included in that $507 million recommendation. So the standards and the cost estimates we made in that are tied to any new building is going to be planned and built to last for 50 years, right? So high quality construction with sustainable green upgrades on the mechanicals, which really includes the board's resolution to be zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2045. You might not know, but the Madison utilities also have zero greenhouse gas emissions by about 2040, 2045 in terms of their grids, so that's consistent. And then the other standard used for the renovations at Anana and Crestwood are anywhere from 30 to 40, 25, 30 years buildings in terms of lasting, and any individual component will be structured or replaced to last at least 10 years, right? So significant time frame in terms of extensive renovations for those two schools. This is the code that we want you to use your phones for. It goes to our website. That website is that mmsd.org/referenda. And then we have more. What? Survey is here. Yeah. Well, you can get through the survey. This is for the survey. Just go there and you will get to that survey. It takes you to the referendum page. I've done it several times. You know, I don't remember everything. All right. We'll be around for additional questions.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. I really appreciate your time tonight. It means a lot that you chose to engage with us tonight, and please keep asking us questions. Thanks. Have a great night.
So I'm gonna, the opportunity here to talk you through sort of a dreaming phase. It's incredibly unusual, and there are so very few opportunities for school communities to design a brand new school, and we want to really maximize this opportunity and hope that we have that opportunity for you all this fall. We're going to think about different and specific areas, and I'd invite you to think about what exists here already around flexible classrooms, around gymnasium space, the cafeteria where students spend time between classes, the library, and also other things like accessibility, parts of the building that certain students can never get to. Safety and security, how students and visitors and families would enter the building to ensure secure entry, and as Bob mentioned, also sustainability. You have at your table pink and yellow Post-it notes, and I want to sort of differentiate those both for you and ask you to use the Sharpies at your table to write some things on as I work my way through these boards. On the pink, you're writing things that you like or appreciate and that you would like to be the same, meaning we have this, we want to make sure we have that again as we design a new building. So pink is for things you want to stay the same or want to make sure that they exist in the new design. The yellow Post-it notes are for things that you would like to be different, things that you see in these images that you've seen in other schools that you don't have now that you would like to be included. So again, pink is for things that should stay the same, yellow are things that you would like added into your design. At the end of the presentation, I'll ask you to then go put those up kind of by the picture that represents that thing you either want to keep or add. We'll take pictures of those, and then all the Post-it notes are pulled back together to document. So starting with flexible and collaborative spaces, we're in the business of instruction. How can spaces be leveraged to help our students learn more effectively? Flexible spaces that allow for different kinds of teaching and learning than we've had or been able to do in the past. Seeing students use spaces in ways we're not used to seeing in our more traditional spaces. And so I'll work my way through a variety of slides here. So on this slide, you can see students have a variety of seating, and they have places where they can collaborate and work together outside of classrooms and in common areas. Next slide. Here you can see how we have spaces for students to hang out. We have a whiteboard here so students collaborate, cafe height tables for students to have a separate conversation while in that same area. You can also see natural light as a fixture in some of these spaces. Next slide. Here you can see one example of how larger common areas can be included, and you see what's referred to as a social stair. If any of you have toured Bell Phillips Memorial since their renovation, they have one of these in what used to be a courtyard at the school. You can also see other flexible areas for seating. You have walkways up above, and these spaces can also be used after the school day for performances, presentation, and focus on the arts. Next slide. Here you can see how carpeting can be different colors to designate different classroom spaces, different age groups, different grade levels. You also have glass walls that can be closed to create smaller instructional areas, opened up to create more flexible use of a much larger space. Again, you see different kinds of seating that create spaces for individual students, small groups, or large groups. Here again, you can see different kinds of a more traditional, sort of modernized individual student desk. And here you can also see where there's sort of a smaller isolated area of the whiteboard so groups of students could go in and work separately. Back here, the same thing. So you could have students break into groups and break into those areas separately. Here you can see how you have bright colors, again, natural light coming into the space, and then furniture that's tied to those spaces to sort of create sense of identity in different parts of the building. Next slide. This is another example of how flexible seating can be incorporated into a common area. This could be a classroom, this could be a cafeteria, there's a sink over here, there's a place to put slides up here, and then wherever we have ceilings that are a little bit higher, then there would be treatments to make sure that sound still travels the way that it should in those large areas to prevent echoing. Next slide. This is an image of a space that is in our Southside Elementary on Madison Southside in that new school, where in what used to just be a common area, creating a smaller space where a teacher can meet with a small group of students, do some targeted instruction, Students could meet, gather, and then you can see that there's whiteboards integrated in that space to again facilitate teaching. Moving on, let's talk about accessibility. We want to make sure that our spaces are inclusive and welcoming and are tightly tied to the sort of school culture and climate that we want to create, ensuring universal design so that every single person that comes to our school buildings feels they belong and can access all of our spaces. Next slide. Here you can see a ramp allowing students to sort of seamlessly transition from one level to the next, and then you have flexible seating in a variety of levels, again with integrated panels that could be used for instruction. Next slide. Again, another example of a ramp that currently could be just a flight of stairs, but you carve out a little bit of extra space and make that a ramp so that it becomes ADA compliant. Next slide. Here you can see open bathrooms and accessible sinks. Again, drinking fountains at different levels, but most of the bathrooms in our new high schools don't have doors and are open, sort of airport style. Most new schools are designed in that way, again, creating more flexible use. Next slide. Moving on, talking again more specifically about classroom spaces. We want our teachers and staff to create thriving learning environments, and they need spaces that support them in doing that. Different desk options, multiple learning spaces. We talked again about flexible sized groupings, either from the large group down to individual student. We'll work our way through a couple slides here. Especially in our high schools, you see some of this where you have some tables and desks that are a little bit higher and some that are lower to sort of naturally create different groupings within a classroom space. Next slide. Here you can see different, again, use of different colors in a classroom to sort of designate different learning areas. Again, large windows and natural light. Next slide. Here's another example where you have integrated sort of counters that allow you to do lab space, a space for the teacher, and again, a lot of natural light. Next slide. In our high schools, that we've developed with a focus on maker spaces and STEM, integrating sort of larger lab, flexible spaces that can be used in ways that a traditional classroom can't and where previous facilities did not allow. Again, creating larger spaces with an emphasis on hands-on learning that can be used in a variety of different ways. Next slide. This is an example of an art space, and so you can see how use of stools, a much higher ceiling. You've got, again, sinks integrated into the space. You have lots of storage. These tables, again, can be pushed together to create sort of one larger collaborative area. Next slide, please. Here's a lab space that has new technology like 3D printers. You've got a sliding glass wall that allows students to experience a classroom setting maybe one day, and then the next day they go to the other side. Next slide. And this is what it looks like on the other side of that wall, where then again we have more of a lab space. You have electricity hanging down from the ceiling here, allowing those spaces to be used more flexibly. Everything's on wheels, so the teacher can work with students from day to day to shift up how the classroom is structured. And then you also have integrated dust control and electricity that supports equipment. Again, not only the glass sliding walls, but also a lot of natural light into these spaces as well. Next slide. Another space that just shows, again, integrated sinks, stools, things on wheels, again, electricity from the ceiling, and then large glass windows for natural light. Next slide. One more example of something like a Lego table, so that spaces that are designed specifically to foster creativity. Again, lots of windows. You can see over into the library here, which also helps just having line of sight so that a teacher can supervise students in a variety of spaces. But again, be using the space in a more productive way. Next slide. One more example, you can see here what looked like booths in a restaurant. This could be a cafeteria, this could be a collaborative space. This is what it could look like if it's raining and we're not going outside after lunch. Just space where people could play cards, get together, study, etc. Next slide. Thinking about libraries, here we are. Libraries are sort of the heart of literacy, and where we want students to hang out, love picking up books and working their way through them. We also want them to be shared spaces that are sort of collectively owned by all the teachers of the school, and they're comfortable bringing their classrooms in. Next slide. Again, very colorful, lots of natural light. If you've been in the libraries of, again, our new high schools, they look more like this with all sorts of flexible seating around the edges and as much natural light as possible. Next slide. Fun shapes for bookshelves, again, to sort of create different areas within the library. Over on the right, you can see more flexible seating at different heights. Again, lots of natural light and windows. Next slide. Here you can see, again, lots of natural light, another cubby area. Again, the purpose of this and these light fixtures, just to sort of inspire some of your thinking around how spaces could look and where you would like to be, where you'd like your children to be. Next slide. Again, use of colors. Here you can see the colors are here. You have a bright wall, and then you have lots of different bookshelves in different places and lots of natural light. Next slide. Commons and cafeteria. Where we want students to come together, building friendships outside the classroom, and we need spaces where they feel comfortable and included. Next slide. Again, you can, in a lot of our schools, the cafeteria is also sort of the space where we would do performances. And so this is also a place where we can feature the arts, but during the day, the tables were allowed and this becomes the cafeteria. Treatments at the, up on the ceiling to sort of prevent sound from bouncing around. Again, lots of natural light and a classroom that overlooks the cafeteria. Next slide. This is another example of the cafeteria where you switch it around and students go in to get their food and turn around, and then where they would actually sort of check out a little bit more in the open space to create a different feel, as opposed to having to sort of work their way in to check out. Next slide. This is, I believe, Southside Elementary again. So you have large glass doors that open up, creating a much larger cafeteria space, and then you can close these back down to sort of separate those, and they could be used as a classroom space or pull a couple of classrooms together to collaborate in a different way. Next slide. One more showing how wood elements can be used. Again, natural light kind of in all of these pictures. You see another performance space here, but you also see all of the wood treatment in the ceiling. Let's move on to gymnasiums. We'll start with a picture of Southside Elementary. Again, things that are consistent throughout these slides. Lots of bright colors on accent walls, lots of glass. Again, here's more bright colors and lots of natural light in these spaces. Keep going. Another example of what could be a performance space. We could have a movie night here. You have accessibility with a ramp to get back up on the stage. Lots of flexible use, including curtains that drop down to separate spaces so that we can have different classes on different sides or activities going on in a large space that for a larger game could be opened up and you have competition throughout the entire space. 54% of our students district-wide are involved in co-curricular activities. We want to make sure that we're thinking beyond sort of the regular school day into what students do after school and in the evening to stay engaged in our school communities. Monitored and controlled entry, we want to also be mindful of safety as we work our way through it. So I'll show you a couple of examples of what some of those safe entries could look like. Here you have students who are entering and checking in the building that way and then are buzzed in. Next slide. This is another example that shows a double entry so that students coming in after school starts would come in, go into the Welcome Center and check in, and then into the school building. Students who are leaving go out through both of those doors. If you think about your entries the way that they are now, when it's cold outside and the doors are open and all the students are streaming in, the building will drop temperature 10 or 15 degrees in that area until everybody's in, the school day starts, and then it slowly warms its way back up. All of our high schools have been redesigned with double entries to make them more energy efficient. Next slide. Here's another example of how you can use the architecture to sort of help create a more welcoming, common entry point so you can see from across the way when you're driving up and visitors would know exactly where they're coming. Signage and again, architectural features that make the school building and the school community unique. Next slide. Sustainability. We've touched on this a few times, but also just wanting to make sure that we want the building to last for a very long time, and in order to do that, we also want it to be sort of energy efficient and sustainable in ways that our current buildings are not. Let's look at a couple of examples. Again, here you can see use of sort of wide open spaces that allow for air to move pretty freely. You also have cathedral ceilings in different places that allow for air to move around, and then again, using lots of natural light, both up above and down below, reducing the amount of lighting that we need in the space. Next slide. And this again is back to Southside Elementary with a little bit of a green roof, a big skylight, and an outdoor classroom where teachers can meet. So let's shift back to our Post-it notes. Again, ideally you have your pink ones where you're writing down things that you like or would like to keep. On your yellow, you're writing down things that maybe you saw here that you would like added in that you don't have. And if you end up with things on either Post-it note, whatever you have, put it over here. We'll be able to make sense of it. Before we get up and sort of open this up into a little bit more of a Q&A forum to interact, mingle around, look at these pictures, and dialogue a little bit, I wanted to put up the QR code, if we could. So as we sort of wrap up the formal presentation this evening, I want to thank you for your engagement and for being here. I know there's a lot of information to process, but we value you taking the time out of your evening to come and sort of hear from us, learn a little bit more about what we're hoping to do for our school communities. Before you go, you can use your phone to submit this survey. That would be great. But at this time, we're also just going to open it up and allow you to put your Post-it notes on these boards, talk with each other, and talk with us. Go ahead.